Birds in the Blackwater, the first day that I remember wanting to write the story, um, maybe there were parts of it that were in play before that, I'm not sure, but when I really remember wanting to write it was I had just come back from a friend's memorial service. Back a few years ago now, a friend of mine ended up taking his own life, and it was very much a shock for everyone in his life, as these things usually are. And I had never been close with his family. He kind of had a lot of different lives he was leading in terms of who his friends were and who interacted with who. So when I went to the memorial service, I found it really jarring because there was his family that I had never met. He had this other friend group, people that the friend group I was part of would never have really interacted with. So it was this weird, I don't know, mixing of cultures almost, and no one really knew how to process it or deal with it. I remember people were so having such a hard time believing that he could have done that there was rumors going around that he was into drugs and he owed some people some money, and or he had a spiteful ex-girlfriend, and maybe he got pushed, or just anything except the actual truth of what happened. And that got me thinking a lot about how people deal with that grief, the kinds of stories people construct in their heads to make sense of something like suicide. And I don't know why, but I was sitting at home, and I remember wanting to write a story to honor him because he was a very important person in my life. He was one of the first people to really believe in my writing. He would just call or message and just check on me at random times to make sure I was still writing because it was so important to him. I think he was someone who really believed that people could do the crazy things that they wanted to do, that life didn't have to just be a 9-to-5 job or buy the books. And so he was always checking in to make sure that I was still writing. And it at that point I felt like I needed to finish something for him because I really was not good at finishing stories or doing justice to them before that. And I knew I wanted it to involve horses because I love horses. I did a lot of horseback riding growing up, and they're used extensively in therapy. There's a lot, I think, to be learned from horses. So those were the only two pieces I had going in. And then I was finishing my degree in psychology at the time, so I thought this is great if I'm going to really dive into people's grief processes. A counselor, a psychologist would make sense for that. And then the story went off the rails from there. I had started, like I said, Birds in the Blackwater was a lesson for me in starting with story structure because I knew kind of what I wanted to say with it in the beginning. Wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. At one point, I had it in my head that the book was actually going to be about parenting as well, that it was going to be a fiction book that taught parents how to use real counseling techniques and parenting techniques for their kids in a subtle, covert way. So it went off the rails, and it spiraled out. And then eventually, during that process of writing the book, I ended up being exposed to Kurt Vonnegut for the first time. I read the book Slaughterhouse-Five, and it just absolutely changed my life. Slaughterhouse-Five is about a war vet who, after he comes home, he starts to believe that he's becoming unstuck in time, that he's moving through different time periods of his life simultaneously and reliving these experiences. It's a book about pain. It's a book about the atrocities we commit against one another. It's a book about mental health. It has a lot of parallels with PTSD, but the way Vonnegut explains it is almost as this outside force. It got me thinking about mental illness as being something that happens in this unseen dimension where we can't see these energies that are acting on our consciousness, but they're there. They're always moving and influencing. And that's where the Cowles, used to be crows came into play in the story. So I added this paranormal element where the mental illnesses, the grief, the traumas that my characters are facing are embodied in these paranormal figures that are always there and interacting from the shadows with my characters. And that's when the story really took on a life of its own and became what it is today. It was a long process of chiseling it into that because there were so many darlings to kill that time around, and because it had taken such a turn midway through the writing process. But at the heart of it, it came together with that embodiment of grief in the aftermath of my friend passing.